Here. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to this ACE New York webinar. My name is Kyle Rabin. I'm a policy analyst with the Alliance for Clean Energy New York, and my focus is on large-scale renewable energy issues. This is our latest virtual clean energy tour webinar. We've done this each year for the past few years. As some of you know, we held an in-person tour back in July, in which we visited Northland Power's Bluestone Wind project in Broome County, as well as Brookfield Renewable School Street Hydroelectric Facility near Albany, and our appreciation to both Northland Power and Brookfield Renewable for hosting our tour that day, and for everyone who participated. While nothing can replace visiting these projects in person, this is the next best thing. And this webinar and virtual tour allows us to reach a larger audience and provide you with a unique view of a few of New York's most critical renewable energy facilities, including one of the newest and one of the oldest projects. On this webinar, we will debut 2 videos produced by Worldview Films, and these include footage of our in-person tour. The webinar also features a panel discussion moderated by Todd Kaminsky, who previously served as New York State Senator and was one of the key authors of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. The panel features representatives from Northland Power, Brookfield Renewable, Attentive Energy, and Operating Engineers Local 158. Our appreciation to Todd and the panelists, as well as Assemblyman Steve Stern, who is the host of today's webinar. I'd like to just mention upfront some key details. One is that this webinar will run for about 90 minutes, so we expect to conclude at 12:30. And the webinar, as you can see, is being recorded, and we will post that to our YouTube page. And we built in some time towards the end of this webinar for some audience Q&A. For anyone who has questions, please post questions in the Q&A feature rather than the chat feature. Hopefully I'm saying that right. We'll address as many questions as possible during the audience Q&A. We'll probably leave like 10 or so minutes to take questions from the audience. So now I will introduce our host of the virtual tour and webinars, Assemblyman Steve Stern. I'll say a little bit to introduce the Assemblyman. He was first elected to the Assembly in 2018 and represents the 10th Assembly District, which includes portions of eastern Nassau County and western Suffolk County on Long Island. Prior to the Assembly, he served for 6 terms as a member of the Suffolk County Legislature. He is a member of the Assembly Energy Committee and serves as chair of the Assembly Subcommittee on Renewable Energy. Assemblymember Stern is passionate about the environment and proud of his legislative record. He regularly receives 100% ratings from leading environmental advocacy organizations in New York State. As a Long Island representative, he is keenly aware that our environment is facing unprecedented threats and is committed to protecting the air we breathe and the water we drink from the dangers of a rapidly changing climate. We will now go to Assemblymember Stern. Thank you again for hosting our webinar today.
And Kyle, thank you so much for having me today. Thank you to Ann Reynolds and all the outstanding professionals and staff of ACE New York. And I wanted to say, most importantly, thank you to ACE for giving me and so many of my colleagues the opportunity to not only learn more from the important conversations that we have with so many professionals within the industry, but the personal experience that ACE New York provides. I had the opportunity to take the tour during the summer of 2022, and we visited sites like Enels Fenner Wind Project, the SUNY Morrisville Agricultural and Clean Energy Technology Center. We then went on, me and my staff, to the Norbit Solar Farm up in Rochester. And we spent time at the Virginia Nuclear Power Plant. Recently, I had the opportunity to go on an excursion with the speaker, members of his staff, and my colleagues to Denmark this past summer, a trip that was led by the Cornell Climate Jobs Institute. which was particularly important because it came on the heels of the recent announcement by the governor that as of 2022, 171,000 jobs in this extremely important and rapidly growing sector was providing the family sustaining careers of the future here in New York. And I know that Todd Kaminsky, who we're going to be hearing from in just a few moments, agrees with me that as we move towards a more just and equitable workforce while developing the green energy infrastructure necessary to combat climate change and protect our precious environment for generations to come, that ACE New York and all of the professionals and organizations that make up this this important effort are truly leading the way. I got to tell you, the best part about the trip to Denmark is when we had the opportunity to spend some time in the port of Aalborg, where they were getting ready to ship out the components for their coming projects. The components that we were standing next to were literally the size of rockets. The rows and rows of these components, these rocket-sized tubes, just went on as far as the eye can see. And I was standing next to one, and it was just tremendous to see the sign on it, the label on it, that it was on its way to be part of the South Fork wind farm being created off of Long Island. The first turbine, just a couple of days ago, that part of that project was just installed. But to have seen it literally on the loading dock before being shipped out was really a special moment, and certainly brought it all home for me, particularly as being a Long Islander, where so much of the action going on with offshore wind in our area is going on as we speak. And for those that attended the ACE New York 2023 tour, it was a tremendous opportunity to see these efforts firsthand. I can tell you, when I was on the tour in 2022, the opportunity to stand right up against a wind turbine and to get a feeling for the immense power, but at the same time to have an appreciation for how relatively silent it was running and producing that kind of energy was really a tremendous impact. This summer, ACE New York held its 6th annual Clean Energy and Jobs Tour, featuring the Northland Power's Bluestone project and Brookfield Renewables School Street hydroelectric facility. These companies, these efforts, continue to help lead the way, throughout New York, and we have every hope and every expectation that New York State will continue to lead the way, not just for us in our region, but for these absolutely necessary efforts across the country, to ensure a brighter future for all of us. If you didn't have the opportunity to attend the 2023 tour, it's my pleasure to introduce the video, the 2023 ACE New York virtual tour, which will then take us into the panel discussion. Again, to ACE New York, Kyle, to you, to Anne, all the professionals involved, thank you for having me today. You're tremendous partners. We look forward to great successes together in the future.
Thank you so much, Assemblyman. And yeah, we'll circle back to you to introduce Todd right after the video.
Yep.
The climate crisis sometimes feels to be this big, unsolvable, we'll never get there. But the reality and the truth of it is it's one project at a time, and we have the solutions in front of us to get there.
This is our 6th Clean Energy and Jobs tour. We find it really helpful to bring people out to see a wind turbine, to see solar panels, or to see a battery project, because they understand then what we're working towards. In New York, about 28% of our power today comes from renewable energy. Most of that is hydroelectric power. We need to build more renewables, but we also need to keep the renewables that we already have operating.
I had no idea it dated well over 120 years ago, and it's a reminder about how these legacy renewable plants and various types of renewable energy are so critical.
Wind energy is one of the cheapest forms of new electricity generation in the world today. The Bluestone Wind Project is 26 turbines. At the peak of the construction, we had over 300 full-time jobs.
The beautiful thing about the wind and solar is the resource is free. Wind is one of the most cost-competitive sources of new generation globally today.
This is 112 megawatts of wind. What that means is it's going to generate enough electricity for about 58,000 households, which is equivalent to about 2/3 of Broome County. To work on these projects, you have to have a lot of patience. There's a lot of ups and downs.
We started construction on these projects and interest rates have gone up. We've had some disruptions with the pandemic and so availability of labor.
Collaboration is key with government, it's with regulators, it's with communities. We're here for the long term.
We have a lot of local members here. They supported this project from the inception of it. We had about 30 to 40 members, local people here that worked on this project for 2 seasons.
We're not building a McDonald's. We're building things that stick up in the sky pretty far. So we need to build relationships and collaboration with the communities and also with landowners.
Yeah, come on, gather around, guys. One interesting thing that's kind of unique to New York State, that's a requirement of our permits, is that these turbines are not permitted to spin at low wind speeds on summer evenings. So that is to protect the northern long-eared bat, which is now an endangered federal species.
We are all seeing the impacts of climate change this summer as much as we ever have. And we need to just make sure that all of the state agencies are rowing in the same direction, that we're not working against each other.
You know, you see maps, you see pictures, but standing in front of the turbines is pretty energizing. Sorry for the pun. You come away from a day like today pretty jazzed about what you do and why you do it.
What really makes this job special for me is the fact that these are renewable energy projects and are making a meaningful dent in the carbon profile of a large state like New York State. So personally, as a father of two young children, I often have to explain what I do, why is it meaningful. There's many more challenges ahead in the fight against climate change, but this is the best thing I can offer through my career.
Yep, it is my pleasure to introduce my friend Todd Kaminsky. Todd, who so many of you on the call today know well. Todd's a member of the government law and policy practice in Greenberg Traurig's Albany office. Having served as a New York State Senator, a federal prosecutor, and an assistant district attorney, Todd has a deep legal and subject matter understanding and expertise in legislative, regulatory, and public policy issues, with a particular focus on environmental, social, governance matters. He's experienced advising regulated entities and complex matters before various state agencies, and in his role as a New York State Senator, Todd was one of the authors of New York's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act Hour, CLCPA, and served as the chair of the Environmental Conservation Committee. Again, it's my great pleasure to introduce my friend, Todd Kaminsky.
Thank you so much, Assemblyman, and thank you to ACE for putting this important panel together. Assemblyman, thank you so much for your leadership in this area. It's been great to watch what you've been able to accomplish, and writing this CLCPA is one thing, but getting those goals met is entirely different endeavor, and we're lucky to have you there to help meet the challenge, especially as fellow lawmakers. So thank you for that. And by the way, when I decided to leave the Senate, no one told me that I'd be giving up a tour to Denmark. They didn't offer those back a few years ago. So that's pretty cool. Hi everybody. This is a great opportunity to talk about the state of renewable development in New York right now. And we've got a great group of those responsible for doing a lot of that development to talk to you about what's happening. And I think two things can be true at the same time. We could be doing monumental, important, groundbreaking things that are amazing to learn about while confronting the real challenges it takes to reach the CLCPA milestones and mandates and figuring out how to tackle those challenges together. And I think what you'll find from our panel today is that they're doing exactly that. They're both building and helping us figure out where, where some of the corrections that need to be made are. When we did write the CLCPA, we knew that these first megawatt things that meant that being the ground floor of a green economy was something that New York really wanted to claim the state to and get the benefits from, but also that we would be learning as we're doing being on the first to do that. And I think we'll hear that from the state panel today. We have Rob Akins from Operating Engineer Local 158, Chris Garofano from Brookfield Renewables, Karen Imus from Attentive Energy, and Chris Stanton from Northwood Power. They're going to quickly introduce themselves, and then we'll get into some questions that I think really get at what's happening with developing renewables in New York right now. So let's start with Rob. Rob, good morning. And you're on mute, Rob. Thanks.
Yes, thanks. Sorry. I'm Robert Akins with the Operating Engineers. I'm the district manager here in Albany. We cover 43 counties from Rochester to Albany, the southern tier, clear to Canada. We have about 3,800 members. I'm also the president of the building trades in the Binghamton and Oneonta. We have about 15 affiliates down there from the different trades. We cover about 7 counties, which involves quite a few of these projects, including the Bluestone and some of the other wind farms and solar farms that we our members work on throughout upstate New York.
Thank you. I'll now pass this over to Karen Imus to say hello.
Hi, Todd. Thank you for inviting me today, and thank you to ACE New York and Kyle for putting this great panel together. My name is Karen Imus. I'm the Senior External Affairs Manager with Attentive Energy. We're an offshore wind developer that was awarded in New York State's most recent round of offshore wind awards, just announced by the governor in NYSERDA last month. A little bit of background on Attentive. We've been present here in the New York area since 2018. Engaging in a great deal of stakeholder outreach to establish really plans and a vision for our offshore wind project and to engage a wide range of entities across the state, from labor to community groups, environmental conservation, academia, and a whole range in between. Attentive Energy in 2022 acquired a lease area in the New York Bight through the federal auction. And that lease area is about 50 miles south of Jones Beach. And has a 3 gigawatt capacity to deliver clean energy into the New York and New Jersey market. Since that time, acquiring the lease area, Total Energies, which is one of the owners of the project, formed a JV with 2 other entities, Rise Light and Power, a power generating facility in Western Queens, and with Corio Generation, another offshore wind developer, to form the joint venture Attentive Energy 1. This is a really impactful project that combines the global resources of Total Energies and Corio Generation with the local know-how of Rise Light and Power, delivering power to the New York City market. Just last month, Attentive Energy 1 was awarded a project, and that project will deliver 1.4 gigawatts, powering 700,000 homes and creating 2,600 jobs in the New York state market, which we're very excited about, to deliver on the promise of clean energy and to help support the governor's Climate Act targets. Just a couple of quick points on the project. It interconnects at the Ravenswood Generating Station in Queens, which is waterfront infrastructure in a historically environmental justice community that's been deeply invested in conversations around how to bring this project to life. We're engaged with the utility workers in a just transition for clean energy jobs at the plant. We have significant investments in different workforce and community training opportunities I can speak to more during the questions. And importantly, really working hand in hand with city, state, and federal authorities to help the transition in creating a clean energy hub here in New York. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. I'm now going to take this over to Chris Garofano to introduce himself.
Hi, good morning. My name is Chris Garofano. I work for Brookfield Renewable. I am the manager of stakeholder relations. I primarily work on our wind and utility solar projects. But today I'm also here to represent our hydroelectric dams, including School Street, and want to thank ACE New York for coming out to take a tour of that facility with us. In New York, we have 74 hydroelectric power facilities. That's our main business in New York. We also do have 3 onshore wind farms, Cohocton, Steel Winds 1 and 2 outside of Buffalo. We generate enough power to power about 440,000 homes a year. And we're excited to be a part of this conversation. We're excited for everybody to be talking about clean jobs and the renewable energy industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Stanton?
Yes, thank you to ACE New York for having me today. My name is Chris Stanton. I'm the Senior Director of Development for Canada and the US for Northland Power. So I'm responsible for the development of wind and solar, principally in New York State, which is a key market for us, as well as Alberta and in Ontario. Northland Power is a global producer of energy. We've got several offshore wind farms in Europe. We've got a number of onshore wind and solar projects operating in Ontario and Quebec. And we're pleased to state today that we now have Bluestone and the Ball Hill Wind Project together operating in New York State as of Halloween. We are producing, on an annual basis, enough energy to supply the needs of almost 89,000 homes. And we've got a number of solar and wind projects under development elsewhere in the state that we look forward to advancing. Also, just as a note, I was the lead developer for the Bluestone Wind Farm, so really happy to see this project discussed today. We were very happy to welcome the members of the Assembly and Senate to this summer, and look forward to discussing it today.
Well, thanks everyone. This is a terrific panel. In my new role at Greenberg Traurig, advising developers on how to navigate challenges in the state, these are topics I get to deal with every day, and they're real and they're serious. There's lots that we can all do together to help untie these knots, and the fact that we have a really great audience today that's interested, whether it's on the government side or on the private side, to work with us, and it's really great to know. So let's try to use this panel in the most beneficial way possible. And I want to ask those on the panel about the challenges that keep them up at night as to whether projects can get over the finish line in New York, especially the projects you're working on. You could each give one example of what a primary thing is that you are most concerned about in your day-to-day roles. Would be really great. I'll start with Karen.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. I think it's a question that's definitely on everyone's mind, and has been something that ACE New York has also been very, very actively involved with. I'll speak sort of a little bit macro and a little bit more project specific. I think on the macro side, certainly there are issues related to supply chain disruptions, continued inflationary pressures, and at times lengthy permitting and regulatory timelines that can exacerbate the projects. I think it's important to look at those challenges, but also recognize that local, state, and federal authorities have been really taking actions to help mitigate some of this, and have increasingly been very adaptable in trying to respond to these challenges, and want to give really credit to NYSERDA in being very forthright in addressing some of this. We've seen an expedited RFI that's about to drop today from the state to help move along procurement of clean energy. We've seen investments upwards of $500 million in ports, manufacturing, and supply chain infrastructure from New York State. At the federal level, obviously the IRA and permitting efficiency reforms are getting underway, and also looking at states setting targets for future offshore wind procurement, I think are all steps in the right direction to help address some of these macro issues. From a project specific point of view, some of the challenges, but also opportunities, are really executing on the commitments made that are part of our project. As part of our award in New York, we have dozens of partnerships with organizations, nonprofits, workforce entities to really deliver on the promise of clean energy. And it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of commitment to really execute on those partnerships to ensure that this is a homegrown New York State based industry. And so we're thinking really thoughtfully about that sort of chain of partnership and executing on those commitments to really stand up the industry here in New York State.
Thank you, Karen. I'll ask Chris from Northland to give answer to this question as well.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Todd. So for me, looking forward, I think Karen correctly mentioned that some of the previous challenges associated, for example, with permitting, with the offtake structure in New York, and by offtake I mean the sale of the energy and RECs and capacity from these projects, have been addressed, and New York has been very responsive to it. I think right now, for all renewable energy developers, we're in a very challenging environment with respect to rising costs as well as rising interest rates. So for those who are, just kind of getting into this industry, renewable energy projects are fairly unique in the sense that they carry a financing as a critical component to how these projects work. And that's a result of the fact that the cost of our fuel is free. And so we're able to put a lot of debt or other types of financing instruments on these projects. And that's what allows us to sell the electricity at attractive prices to society. So rising interest rates have a direct and strong impact on our economics and the costs of our energy. As well, we've come out of a several-year cycle, an inflationary cycle that particularly hit this industry very hard, wind and solar. We see signs that maybe both of those trends might be trending in the right direction, very recent signs on interest rates as well as costs. But in general, what keeps me up at night is the idea that we make commitments to sell that energy several years in advance. And in that intervening time period between the commitment being made and start of construction, our cost structure or our financing costs change significantly and make it difficult for us to deliver on the basis of that contract with NYSERDA. So yeah, that would be my main worry and the main thing that keeps me up at night.
Thank you. Chris from Brookfield.
There we go. Yeah, I mean, I think Karen and Chris really covered it there with the rising costs and the inflation. I think that's the big issue for us as well. And, we're not currently developing anything in New York, but I think, maintaining the operating facilities that we already have, getting replacement parts, the supply chain issues, and the cost with that, and making sure that we're able to keep these projects running smoothly and effectively in a way that makes sense. And also, doing upgrades to projects with our hydroelectric facilities, which are legacy hydro. Most of the time they're old. And they could really use some upgrades, and the cost is just not, that's what would keep me up at night, would be the cost.
Yeah, Rob.
Yeah, I think my experience with a lot of these projects, with the permitting and the manufacturing, like was talked about, or the materials and the cost of the materials is difficult. But it's difficult for our contractors to bid a project that's maybe not permitted yet, and no potentially start date of construction, and the timing is an issue for us. We have to supply very skilled, highly skilled members to these projects, and if the timing is off or we have too many, it's really difficult to train. So like I said, the timing's the most important thing for us. When the projects are going to be released, when are they going to start construction, how we're going to man these projects, how we're going to hire people that are skilled to man these projects, and that's what keeps us up at night.
Yeah, no, thank you. Certainly the certainty on timeline is a good challenge. I'm going to ask Assemblymember Stern a related question, because I think some of the challenges that we've seen on Long Island come from community issues. And by that, I mean, I live down in Long Beach, where there was tremendous opposition against a particular project. There are battery moratoria all over the place, up and down New York. So, I'd like to ask Assemblymember Stern what advice he would give developers on how to approach communities that they intend to develop projects in, and just generally how you see some of that playing out. And you just want to unmute your phone.
Had some experience with siting and with big projects like UTOD over the years, whether they be energy related or just trying to get a construction project done. It really is all about engaging and it's about doing it early and often. I remember a couple of years ago, I had just become the chair of the subcommittee on renewable energy in the Assembly. And I spent a little time at a conference with some displays in the convention center. I was talking to a lot of the various companies that had projects coming up or at least in the pipeline. And I urged them to get on the ground in the communities early and often and make impact every time you created an opportunity or had an opportunity to touch an organization, a person, a single resident in a community. If you think that there's going to be a project in a particular area, you and the organization must engage the community. Like I said, it's got to be early and often. That's the best advice. And to date, that's in our region, the only thing that I've ever seen that has been successful. Early and often with plenty of stakeholders in the area, that's how these projects get done.
Yeah, really appreciate that. I think every now and then we see the tact of if you don't talk about it, it's not happening. And if you don't ever have a forum, then no one can hijack it. So let's have as little conversation as possible. And I think what Assemblymember Stern's saying is in the absence of that, things can really metastasize in a bad way against the project. So thank you for sharing that perspective. I want to specifically talk about the permitting and interconnection process. And for those who have developed projects in New York, I would love to get your sense of the experience with that and any recommendations you might be able to make so that when you do it again, it may go a little bit better, or perhaps, maybe you want to keep something in place because they did go well for you. So I'm going to ask Chris from Northland Power his thoughts on it.
Yeah, sure. Todd, that's a good question. I think Bluestone is a good example of a project that really was developed right as a lot of these structures in New York were changing, and certainly could have benefited from some of the things that have changed since. But Bluestone is an Article 10 project. That's a state issued siting permit. Application was filed, I believe, sometime in it was 20. Gosh, I'm forgetting. It was 2018 or 2019, but the permit was issued by the state of New York in December 2019, and it went through the original, the current class year study process through NYSO, and I think it completed that class year study process in 2019. Subsequent to the permit being issued, the project was sold from the original developer, Calpine, who I used to work for, to Northland Power, who I work for now, and it proceeded through what's called the compliance filing process, which is a fairly onerous set of permitting restrictions that probably members of the public or assembly may not even be fully aware about. But in the state of New York, you get your permit issued, this is kind of something unique about the state of New York. You get your permit issued, but then you have to demonstrate to in this case DPS and now to ORES that you have a plan to adhere to each of those conditions, and they want details about your plan. It's all a very well-intentioned process, and it obviously leads to a lot of the outcomes that society desires, but it is a very time-consuming and expensive process and a difficult process. So Bluestone received permissions on all of its compliance filings, and then began construction began tree clearing in February 2021, and began full construction around June of 2021. And finally entered, commercial operation with NYSERDA here this fall in 2023. So it gives you an idea of, the initial contact with landowners in the town and other stakeholders was around 2016. And I completely agree with the comment from the assembly member that, frequent and often discussions are absolutely critical for these large infrastructure projects. So you kind of get an idea of that time scale. First discussions 2016, permit issued 2019. Power being produced late 2023. Certainly, Bluestone would have benefited from the new interconnection process as a result of the FERC order. The class year study process, as run by NYSO, was disorganized, and it just moved slower than I think everyone, including NYSO, acknowledged would have been helpful. In addition, you know, one thing that was unique about the Bluestone permit was that it was issued, you know, it was issued at a time when the town of Sanford, one of the towns that is part of the project, issued a local law that set new standards on the project that would have been very difficult for the project to meet. But that local law was issued like 2 days before the permit was issued by the state, which was a very unique circumstance. And that's since been clarified in the ORES process that towns are asked to comment and provide feedback and issue local laws as part of the record early in the process. So developers can take account of that rather than have standards changed at the very last minute, right before the permit is about to be issued. So some of the changes that have come about would certainly have helped Bluestone. I think one area for improvement going forward, I think that, you know, isn't unique to Bluestone, but it's true of a lot of other projects. Bluestone did have a very lengthy process from the point that the interconnection agreement was signed with NYSO and the utility to actually getting energy back into the project. And that's because I think that's largely a result of, you know, there hadn't been a large renewable energy project or any power generation project constructed in that part of New York State in that part of Zone E for a very, very long time. And so we had to work closely with the utility to develop processes and dust off procedures to get that facility interconnected. And we look forward to kind of the lessons learned and the relationships we built with the utility from that. You know, we look forward to applying them, being much more efficient on the next one. Which is in the same area than that first, but it certainly wasn't easy. And hopefully there may be a role for the state or the assembly to potentially clarify how utilities and developers work together to actually design and construct the interconnection facilities from after the point where NYSO steps back and when you're in the utility design and build phase, which is, I think, an area where a number of high-profile renewable energy projects in New York State have faced certain delays, and so we'd look forward to some improvement on that side of, or that part of the process.
Oh, thank you, Chris. Chris from Brookfield. Has your experience been the same?
I really can't speak to the permitting process specifically. I primarily handle community relations, so I'm just not the right person to speak to our permitting experience. But I will, you know, double down on what the assembly member was saying about, you know, making contact with the community frequently and often. I think that that's really important. I think that probably helps pave the way for the permitting and development folks as well. Building those relationships in the community, laying the groundwork with the landowners, laying the groundwork with the local elected officials, you know, being active with the local nonprofits. A lot of the communities that we operate in are very rural. So being active with the ATV clubs and the hiking clubs and snowmobile clubs and supporting all of those local groups and making sure that they know that we're being a good neighbor.
How you doing?
I think is really important to laying the groundwork for the permitting process and for the development folks as well. So from my side of the fence, working on stakeholder relations, I think that's how I try to help our development folks, is by building those relationships on the front end, you know, before we're even going into the community, to hopefully pave the way and make it easier for the development folks when they're looking for those permits.
Okay, we're going to come back to that issue in a little bit, Chris. So thank you, Karen.
Yeah, and I would echo Chris's sentiment about starting early and what the assembly member mentioned about early and often. Just in the context of our, you know, permitting, there are obviously different layers. We are recently awarded, but have started our permitting processes already, as we've been working towards submission to NYSERDA and an award. Some of that is federal permitting at the BOEM level. So BOEM would review a site assessment plan, which is well underway. BOEM would also review a construction and operations plan, which we're working actively on now for submission in 2024. And at the state level, we've submitted an Article 7 permit to the state for the underwater submarine cable that would interconnect at our Ravenswood generating station. And all of this is accompanied through the process by various stakeholder engagement touch points and milestones, which we're working on as well. But I think important to state that we've been working on these conversations, you know, predating any permit submissions. These have started early and have taken place with frequency. And just to give you a couple of examples, earlier this year, we held large community fairs and forums in Western Queens, right around the Ravenswood Generating Station. It's actually located next to Queensbridge Houses, which is the largest public housing facility in the United States. There's a deep interest in the local community around environmental justice issues and the retirement of the fossil infrastructure, which is a key part of the Attentive Energy One project, but also a deep interest in how does this work? What is the timeline? When will this come online? What are the local impacts? And we've started those conversations very early to keep people apprised. The transparency is critical. And it's not only critical on the construction and operations side, but it's critical on the job side to explain the pathway and the pipeline to bringing local jobs on board as well. So there's kind of the regulatory formal permitting piece that's well underway, but all the important stakeholder engagement that we're undertaking and that should be taking place really at a very frequent and often capacity in order to keep folks engaged and to make sure that they have a seat at the table as well.
That's very, very important to hear, and we appreciate that. And speaking of jobs, Rob, what's your sense of some of the regulatory delays that have been faced, especially with permitting or interconnection, and how that relates into how your men and women are able to perform their work? And if you please unmute, that'd be great. Thank you.
It's fairly exhausting, the process for us. Our members are fairly impatient. But the only thing we can really help with is most of the time with these projects, we have a lot of members that live in the communities. These projects are being built. So of course they're supportive. They want to work at home. They want to be closer to their families. So any, public hearings or anything of that such that have the permitting process requires, we usually help with. But it's just a long process from the inception. If you example, the Bluestone wind farm, our members get impatient, and it seems like it's very there's no light at the end of the tunnel sometimes for our people. But we usually always get there. It's years and years, and that becomes pretty difficult.
Would some of this delay ever put you in a situation where a project needs to get going and it's hard to find the labor to do it, or is it because people are on other projects? Like, how are you able to stagger the workforce such that you're ready when someone says, okay, great?
Well, we try to, we have to train a new workforce also. So, our training is part of it. We always we have upcoming training, so timing is everything for us. I mean, if there's no work at home for these members in their community, they have to go someplace else. And a lot of times they can't wait, for a project to come around. They have to feed their families, so they have to do what they have to do. But yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's just usually what helps us out a lot in these type of wind farm projects is we have to clear trees because of the bat window in the winter. So, and we're technically seasonal workers, so we have a lot of availability in the winter for our for members to be on the job. But as more and more of these projects come out, we have to have more and more trained people to do these projects at that time. I mean, that's just the nature of the renewable energy stuff.
And do you find that your members are now in a lot of these town meetings where projects are being debated, and they're spending their nights in support of them and kind of being emissaries for the projects and weighing in on some of these political battles?
Yeah, we do a lot of that. Our members, as Chris knows, we show up at hearings all the time, in support of these projects. That's one of our biggest things that we can do. So but the members, they show up at a project at a hearing in 2016, and the inception of the project doesn't happen until 2023. It's a little, it's tough to explain how that process is so delayed.
Oh, no, thank you. That's interesting to hear. So I'd like to ask the panelists about what it's like to deal with New York State agencies. And I mean that in two ways. One is, do you find that when you have issues, there's someone to speak with, that there's a responsive voice on the other end of the line? And do you also find that coordination is happening, and that one agency appreciates what another is asked of you, and if you bring issues forth, that there's able to be coordination there? And and obviously this would be great for the assembly member to hear, since he sits in an oversight capacity, and obviously in his role in the budget and other things to help push for some more coordination. Do you find that there's responsiveness and coordination in dealing with the agencies? And if you think there could be any improvement, where would you direct the constructive criticism? I'll start with that.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. That's I think that's a good question, and I think it's a question that's not exclusive to the offshore wind sector. In a previous life, I worked on flood resiliency projects across the city and the state, and the interagency cooperation needed to execute on major infrastructure projects like that range from Army Corps to state DEC to city EDC. There's a lot of comparables to offshore wind, actually, and so I think interagency coordination at different levels of government is just essential to any major infrastructure, moving any major infrastructure project forward. And I think it's always promising when there are interagency or regional task forces or working groups that can help with that kind of coordination. And I know that New York State has implemented groups of that nature. Groups that look at, for example, transmission issues from an interagency multidisciplinary lens, or that look through marine issues through that lens. And NYSERDA has really, I think, taken a leadership role in putting those kinds of working groups together. So I think that interdisciplinary approach is going to be key. And I think, we've had a very open conversations with NYSERDA as through bidding and now, post award. And they are working at I think, intense clip to meet these offshore wind targets. So I think it's been a productive conversation with the state and a positive one. And, again, as things move forward, this is a new industry, offshore wind, and not everything is super clearly defined. So it's iterative. And there, I think, over time are going to have to be adjustments and improvements and new bodies potentially that address some of the things that we're seeing or anticipating. And again, I would just reinforce that interagency cooperation, and not just at the state level, but across different levels of government, is going to be really important to moving these projects along expeditiously.
Thank you. Chris Stanton, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think Karen alludes to something that's really important, which is I think of it more in the state context. I know she's thinking about the federal government, but I think about it within the state context. These are extremely large projects geographically. They touch a lot of different things that are of concern to society, right? We cross public roads, we cross streams, we alter the landscape, and so I think it's tough. It's very hard, but it's doable for state agencies to coordinate with each other. I'd say our experience of the Bluestone Wind Farm was that the Department of Public Service was tough but very fair, and I think we got good honest feedback regularly that allowed us to kind of correct things before they became a problem and improve the project as we moved along. I think one thing that was challenging was that the relationship under Article 10 between the DEC and the DPS wasn't super well defined, and so the DEC did as they would on any project and regulated the project from their own perspective, and we worked closely with DEC to fix issues as they popped up too. Sometimes it was challenging to have two different regulatory masters that sometimes didn't speak with one voice. I know that process has tried to be corrected under the new ORES process, so maybe there's some good good outcome there. It's some lessons learned that have already been implemented. I'd say with respect to the Department of Public Service, like, it was extremely helpful to have folks come out and respond as issues popped up. People who had experience with large scale projects, having been on construction sites, understanding what it's like when you build a large road or a large project. That was very helpful. I thought that the types of feedback, and the appraisal was really well grounded, and was matched the size of the project. And I think that's really important. I think as an agency, ORES is fairly new and they're still growing in capability, but I think I would recommend in New York State to not you've got some really good people in the Department of Public Service who've it would be a shame for some of that talent and capability to sort of sit on the sidelines in creating this new agency, and it would be nice to make use of that talent that you already have available to you. So I'd say those are.
Chris, are you involved in or adjacent to development in other states? And if so, can you compare it to what that's like versus New York?
Yeah, no, we unfortunately not in the other U.S. states, but we've got several large projects going on here. I'm actually in Calgary, Alberta right now. I'm speaking to you from our office here in Calgary. We have several large solar projects going on here. In many respects, the permitting process here is similar to New York State. It's a state issued siting permit, or provincial issued, province issued siting permit. But it's definitely true that there's a bit more of a centralized regulatory apparatus that deals with large projects like this, and there's definitely not multiple agencies. It's really one agency who's your interface point. So just I think that's the intention behind the changes in New York, and I hope to see that I hope to see that move from just the all that's been so far has been at the permit review stage or the application review stage. Obviously now, as some of these ORES projects go into construction, it'll be really interesting to see how the experience of these developers in interacting with the regulatory authorities as construction is progressing and as things pop up, as they inevitably do on projects of this size.
That's something here, and I appreciate you sharing that wider perspective. Assembly member, along those lines, how do you see the evolving role of the legislature here? A lot of this is now in agency hands to figure out how to promulgate regulations and help push projects along and deal with the intricate parts as we move along, like permitting and interconnection. Do you see a role for you and your colleagues to oversee that? Do you still think that your job is to also pass laws that push the mandates a little harder? In other words, I think there may be a view that after the CLCPA, the goals were set. Now it's up to the agencies to carry them out. And thank you, legislature, for doing that. We got it from here. Interested, which I don't suspect you subscribe to. So interesting to think when you hear things like this from developers, what you see your role could be formally or informally, and then from 10,000 feet as well.
Sure. Well, Todd, I can answer for myself, and I think, probably for most of my colleagues. I do think that there is and really needs to be an ongoing hands-on role for the legislature. For me personally, I meet constantly with professionals in the industry about these very concerns that we've been talking about. And particularly when it comes to agency coordination. And they'll say, look, NYSERDA, NYPA, ORES, DEC, and that's just on the state level. It doesn't even include the localities and interplay with the federal government. So we know well the challenges that the professionals are experiencing, even working with some of the best professionals in the world. That we have in our administrative agencies, but it's an alphabet soup and a lack of coordination. We need to be looking at best practices in order to streamline the process. I'd like to think that the speaker and our assembly leadership understands that well, which is why they have appointed me as the chairman of the Assembly Regulatory Review Commission, with exactly this kind of oversight and role to play. And try and be an important part of this coordination between the legislative lyrics and the agency music that is supposed to line up in harmony, which all too often does not. So, Todd, there has to be an ongoing, very meaningful and impactful role for the legislature to continue to play. Legislation is good, but at the end of the day, it has to be the professionals in the agencies, common sense, and a willingness to move the ball down the field at a meaningful pace in order to meet our goals.
Thank you, Assemblyman. That panel is very interesting that you get to work on. So we look forward to seeing what you do with that. Karen, question about offshore wind development in New York. What is your general sense, if you will, want to make a prediction on when construction jobs can materialize and how long you think it will take to develop offshore wind projects, from winning the bid till people see actual results?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Just speaking for our project, we are anticipating the next, say, 2 to 3 years of permitting at all these various levels that we've been discussing, to begin construction in 2027, and to have the project operating in 2029, possibly 2030. That's our current timeline for executing on Attentive Energy 1.
And Karen, how often are you talking with, this is kind of like pulling the curtain back, how often are you talking with other people in your industry who may be competitors on one day, but you may be standing with at an event, in terms of how the challenge they're facing and whether you could learn from it and whether there's any collaboration behind the scenes going on at all?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I should give a real shout out to the New York Offshore Wind Alliance here for their coordination in bringing us developers all together. This is a very new industry in New York and in the United States, so having these kinds of industry associations bringing us developers together is new and is complicated because, as you said, Todd, we're going through competitive solicitations while at the same time trying to advocate for constructive policy. And there's, something to be said for, predictability in the market that's really important to standing up these projects. So, for example, having offshore wind targets, right? Right now in New York, the target is 9 gigawatts, but what is it going to be for the next 15, 20 years? Are we looking to advance future offshore wind targets? And we're having similar conversations right across the state line in New Jersey. I think that those kinds of targets and that kind of predictability, as well as, for example, transmission needs, are things that we can collectively look at as an industry and agree are important to bring the market forward. Supply chain issues as well. There are going to be areas where we don't always agree on everything. As you know, different projects were contracted at different times and maybe experience different economic conditions or different local siting issues. And those can become very project-specific issues. But I definitely think as the industry matures, there are many things that we are working on together and will continue to work on together and to be vocal about together. I think advocacy is hyper important right now. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of misinformation out there about offshore wind. And it's really incumbent on all of us to find a way to collectively have some common messaging, and also to really work hand in hand with the governor on the Climate Act, because at the end of the day, I think it's also important to take a step back and remember why we're working on all of this. And I know for example, the COP conference is going on in the Middle East right now, and we're talking about the 1.5 degrees Celsius. And at the end of the day, think about our future generations, and these projects are going to take a long time to bring online, but it's going to be increasingly important to do that so that, the next hurricane that happens, we're all reminded again about our shorelines disappearing and everything else, and how important it is to be able to execute these projects. So again, we are finding common messaging across the industry to really kind of help to advance not just our projects, but to advance these clean energy goals overall.
No, thanks, Karen. It's obviously important to get the wider perspective. And remember that as we're going forward on these sometimes smaller issues, but nevertheless important. All right, Chris Stanton, I have a funny question for you. Somebody comes to you and says, I'm an investor. I've heard that New York, because of the CLCPA thing, is a place where I can develop a clean energy project. I've got tens of millions of dollars to deploy. I'd like you to tell me whether I should do this in New York in light of IRA, in light of CLCPA. should I develop a clean energy project in New York, and what type of project should I develop? I'm in your hands. You tell me what to do. I go and do it tomorrow. What do you say?
Put me on the spot, Todd. I would say that New York State is not, it's not for the faint of heart. It's not necessarily an easy place to develop your first project, and it's an easier place to develop your second or third project. And I think by that I mean almost sort of by default, if you create a complex web of regulatory touch points, which we've created in New York, which is all well intentioned, right? Like it's all, and I think it works pretty well in some ways. But it's a lot of relationships that you want to build and cultivate, and so it's always harder when you do the first one versus the second, third, fourth one. I think if you look at the group of companies that have traditionally built most of the renewable generation in New York, the list is fairly short. Northland is a newcomer to New York. As I said, we just brought online our 2 wind projects, and there's a ton of takeaways for us with respect to the next wind project or the next solar project we're going to advance. So I think you alluded to money. It is also a costly place to permit versus other places in North America, and that's a result of the permitting process requires a fairly advanced level of design, and a fairly advanced and robust level of site diligence to be completed even prior to being able to apply for your permit. And that's like a double-edged sword, right? It creates a barrier to entry for some companies, but it also ensures that on society's behalf that only projects that are serious and well thought out advance into the permitting process. So so I think a lot of the structures in New York are designed to create some credible barriers to entry to ensure that only credible players are at the table. Obviously, with that, you get less competition, and also you increase the level of risk that you spend a few years developing something and then you find out it's not going to work out. So it's higher risk, and obviously probably I think that's all I'll say on that. I certainly please, I don't want anyone to take my comments out of context. Like I understand, like New York has certain goals that it really wants to meet in addition to getting the megawatt hours of clean energy. They also want this effort to meet other goals of society, and that's fantastic. I think it's done a great job at that. Obviously, that comes with a cost. That desire. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. I have 2 more questions, and then we'll kick it over to the audience. We'll first the video, and then to the audience Q&A. Chris from Brookfield, and then over to Rob. Chris, can you talk about obviously not ones you've been involved in, but either from afar or that you've been adjacent to? Where does community engagement go wrong? Projects not succeed where on paper they certainly should have, and the benefits probably should have been realized. Like where does that go wrong, and what do you advise folks on all sides, government, developers, maybe just a community member watching this right now and wants to know how they can get involved in their community to make sure good things happen and misinformation doesn't win the day? How would you describe what you've seen and how to?
Yeah, I think where things go wrong with the communities that we're trying to operate in or trying to develop in is really when there isn't communication. Like the assembly member was saying earlier, early and frequent. If that doesn't happen, then folks don't feel heard, and if folks don't feel heard, then they don't feel happy, especially when we're putting up large wind turbines that they're going to have to look at. You do need to combat some of the misinformation out there, which is difficult. And I think that the way to do that is to really get out into the community and be on the ground, hire staff that's actually going to go out and be in the community, go to meetings, talk to your landowners, meet them in person, meet them where they are, make them feel heard. And I feel like it's actually very similar to working in politics, where, the very first thing that people want is to be heard, and they want to genuinely feel like you're listening to them. And I think that that's what's really important, to make sure that you don't face that opposition. If you actually have that conversation with people, then they're less likely to come out and protest you or oppose your project. I think if you kind of, clam up and don't communicate with the community, then they're going to be more likely to have issues with the project, and they're going to be vocal about it. So yeah, I think getting out there and doing more than just, one community meeting before developing the project. I mean, you need to really go out there and build solid relationships and go to community events and host community events and sponsor them, and be a really good neighbor and a really good partner. And that's what I try to do with our landowners too, beyond just, community events, but the landowners themselves. I'm like, here's my cell phone number, you have my line. Like, I want you to feel like you're heard, and you can call me and talk to me, and I will answer any questions that you have if you have any issues. And I think that our team has done a good job of building that line of communication up, so that landowners and community members feel like if they have an issue, if the turbine's noisy, if they have shadow flicker, anything like that they might want to voice their concern about, we're here and we're available and they can talk to us. And I think that really goes a long way.
Thank you, Rob. Somebody comes to you and says, I'm a developer, I really want to work with you on building this project and make it successful. What do you think about how we get from here to there? What do you advise them in terms of the community, in terms of whatever comes to your mind? What works, what doesn't?
Well, I gotta say, we got a very highly skilled workforce, which it's important. That's really important. I mean, these especially wind farms they're very difficult and very intensive to put together. I mean, we have cranes out there that are 600 foot tall. So, I think we've got the experience, we got the members, we can train the members. We have a highly skilled workforce. So I think that's attractive to me. I think that's attractive to developers. The labor can be a pretty big issue, but we've been doing it for, we've built wind farms for quite some time. It's becoming more and more, they're a little different. So we got to get accustomed to windmills like the Bluestone wind farm. They're bigger, but our members are, our crane licenses are very, very highly sought. So that's the biggest thing I would say is a high skilled workforce.
Okay, that's great. Well, thanks to the panelists for this initial round of questions. We're now going to watch the video, and then after we do so, we'll take some audience questions before we wrap up. But this is a very insightful time.
Thank you so much, Todd, and for this great discussion. Appreciation to the panelists. We're going to show two short videos, one of which is produced by Worldview Films related to job creation, and another pertaining to offshore wind. Then we'll circle back to take some questions posted in the Q&A. So please take this time, if you haven't posted a question yet and you have a question for all the panelists or one of them, please feel free to post that in the Q&A feature. And we will now go to the videos.
There's so many different pieces to the puzzle of getting renewable energy projects to construction.
The state has got tremendous decarbonization targets. They want 70% renewable in the state by 2030.
There's a lot of work that needs to get done to achieve that.
These bring a lot of purpose to the work that we're doing on this project at Bluestone.
It was huge for local jobs. We have a lot of local members here. They supported this project from the inception of it. We had about 30 to 40 members, local people here that worked on this project for 2 seasons. It was 2 full seasons of salary, benefits, and health care. It was fantastic.
People waking up and going to bed in their own community is pretty important. We're pretty proud of what we've been able to do here.
At the peak of the construction, we had over 300 full-time jobs, and 70% of those came from unions in the southern tier of the state.
And we're going to have a staff of 6 or 8 individuals at this location long term.
Organized labor has been a part of renewable energy for quite a long time. We transformed from pipelines to gas to this renewable energy wind farms, solar farms. It's been great all throughout the state, all locals, most trades. It means jobs and that's what we look for our members. They want to go to work, they want to feed their families.
And on top of all that, it decreases our reliance on carbon-intensive electricity generation.
Is the Bluestone Wind project going to solve the climate crisis? No. Is it a part of it? 100%. This is a collection of people that took action into what is a global crisis. It's the think global, act local axiom.
Offshore wind energy is a new pathway forward to thousands of good-paying union jobs. From manufacturing the components at locations across New York State to installing the turbines and the transmission infrastructure needed to bring the power to shore, this new industry will require thousands of workers to get the job done. These family-sustaining jobs will provide opportunities for New Yorkers now and into the future.
Thank you, Jared, for running those two videos, and we'll go back to Todd and again want to express our appreciation to the audience who's joined us for today. And if you have any questions, please post in the Q&A feature and we'll take your questions now, but I'll go back to Todd for that.
Well, we have a question here from Mary Ann Cunningham, who returned from Denmark, where energy production and district heating is initiated and owned by local cooperatives. Do we think there's room for a co-op project developing renewables here in New York? Now, I admit this is something I certainly don't have a lot of experience with. So if the panelist has a thought on that, please feel free to jump in at your leisure.
Might be.
I'll just jump in more with just a comment, and it's not a space that we work in. We're working on commercial scale, large scale offshore wind generation, and I think, you know, looking at the challenge of clean energy, I think there's different lenses to look at this through, and you know, one is, you know, meeting these very large, ambitious offshore wind or clean energy targets set by the state will require commercializing large projects, but at the same time having a pathway to, sure, something like a local cooperative, I think is a really interesting concept. I'm not super familiar with these existing in New York, but you know, this is the kind of thing for some of our advocates, environmental advocates and industry associations to look at more closely. And you know, certainly I think from the perspective of the question from Mary Ann, it's a great idea to sort of shop around to the environmental advocates as an area for further exploration.
Karen, certainly something has changed over the last 10 years or so, that companies that like the joint venture you're working on have international companies who may have never had a footprint in New York before now wanting to be part of that. Do you see that trend continuing, and do you see New York continuing to be a place where companies from all over the world want to invest and develop clean energy projects?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Total Energies, which is kind of the piece of the joint venture that I'm associated with, has a very growing renewable energy footprint in the United States. It's well on its way to being one of the top 5 renewable energy developers in the US through the combined portfolio of solar, onshore, offshore wind. And I think, you know, the New York market is attractive for a whole host of reasons. From, you know, the governor's targets and the offshore wind clean energy targets being set. I think the labor pool and just the I think appetite to bring clean energy in is great here. And I think, again, having predictability in the market is important, and also regional predictability. If you look at the offshore wind lease areas in the New York Bight, you're looking at everything from, you know, Massachusetts down to Delaware. So I think New York State will, you know, certainly continue to be attractive to developers. But there's also kind of a regional perspective here that I think is important, because it's over time, I think looking at this industry through a state-by-state lens will potentially evolve and become more regional when we're talking about, you know, everything from supply chain to employment to maritime I think, again, as the industry evolves, there will be, I think, more regional aspects that we will need to look at.
Yeah, and Chris Stanton, you probably think that that with transmission, the interregionality would play a greater role, and that transmission is something that needs a continual focus so that the projects that you and others like you build are able to get where they need to go.
Yeah, I think Todd, the short answer is that as New York State's renewable energy penetration grows, the benefits to society of sharing more energy across state borders increase, right? So that's well demonstrated in areas of high renewable energy penetration where you can send energy from region to region. Already New York State will benefit significantly from the diversification from of wind and solar onshore with the types of projects Karen is working on offshore, right? That right away is going to improve the production profile of renewable energy in New York State. But obviously, to the extent that there can be additional sharing with energy produced in Canada or Points West and PJM, which is the marketplace that covers the Midwest and Pennsylvania and New Jersey, there's obviously huge potential benefits. I will add, though, as so many media articles have pointed out, and so many people have exhaustively stated, right? Transmission is hard to build. It's very challenging in the United States. There's no clear framework for interstate transmission like there is for interstate natural gas pipelines, and so it's a challenging enterprise to build these long distance transmission lines. And so despite the fact that there's great economic incentive to do so, you can see how few of them have actually been built, and that's a function of the difficulty in getting these projects approved.
Okay, and I'll ask a final question to the panelists that I think touches on many of the topics that we've covered today. Given the length of time for permitting and interconnection, I'm assuming that it will continue to be somewhat lengthy. Is there a better way for New York to do procurement, such as awarding contracts that are farther along, or something New York could do that could make the procurement process have less risk for developers? So, I think it's worthy of the great conversation we've had today to end with a final recommendation or suggestion for a solution as we move forward. So I'm going to first ask Karen, then Chris, and then ask Rob and Chris from Brookfield to make some closing comments.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it's like with anything evolving, as I mentioned earlier, there's an expedited RFI that NYSERDA is putting out today. It shortens the timeline. It asks only for certain sets of information. Again, that can, potentially just streamline the information that NYSERDA needs to process in order to make a decision. I think, how those RFIs are shaped will evolve, and tightening that decision-making timeline, I think is going to be important. So, it's something that I think we're going to see, change as we learn lessons from these different procurements. But just speaking in terms of how the governor and NYSERDA were able to pivot and to launch this process very quickly after the recent PSC decisions to turn down some of the subsidies for contracted projects, I think seeing those kinds of quick pivots is really important. I think it also reinforces the need for staffing. And this is kind of on a related note, but also maybe addresses some of the questions around permitting. Because as these kinds of pivots are going to be needed, and as the review of RFIs is going to be needed, and many new permits in the pipeline, the staffing of these agencies like NYSERDA is going to be hyper important as well to move these procurement processes along efficiently.
That's a great point, especially connecting the 2 points we made before about the Assembly and Senate's role as budget oversight. People power within the agency certainly falls right within that area. So that's important to hear. Chris Stanton, your final thoughts on this, and then I'll kick it over to Chris from Brookfield and Rob Akins for concluding thoughts.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. I would echo Karen's point that, extremely impressive how quickly NYSERDA pivoted here. I mean, it takes a lot of effort to put one of these RFPs out, and they're doing one for both offshore and onshore. Tremendous effort. Northland Power is supportive of the concept that at least this initial expedited RFP should feature or prioritize projects that are ready to build quickly to kind of fix to ensure that certain projects don't end their development because of how long they've been out there and sort of slow down the attrition rate. So we are supportive of it for this round. I think more broadly for future procurements, it's an interesting question, right? Like the state has to balance the desire to have as many people participating in the market as possible. If you get the highest participation rate by opening your procurement to all projects, but obviously if you do that, you run the risk that you award contracts to projects that'll never get built. So it's a balancing act between trying to encourage as many participants in the market as you wish versus achieving a higher degree of certainty. And so I think that's like a really important question for NYSERDA for like the 2024 RFP and later, like how are they going to find that balance? Obviously, as we get closer to 2030, they still got a couple seasons where folks can strike out, but as they get closer to 2030, the pressure on NYSERDA to close that gap with respect to the 2030 goal is only going to increase. And I imagine we're going to see the requirements tighten as we get closer to that date because they're going to need to have a higher degree of certainty that they won't see the same high attrition rate on those projects as they've seen in the past.
That makes sense. Chris from Brookfield, final thoughts on New York and moving forward?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to Ace and to you, Todd, for having us today and for hosting this event. I agree with what Karen and Chris are saying. It's impressive that NYSERDA was able to pivot, and I look forward to seeing how they are able to continue moving forward in the future. And just to pull back a little bit, I think all of us here, this is an important and growing industry, and all of us here are pulling in the same direction to, these are businesses, we're here to make money, but we're also, trying to move forward with the state's clean energy goals. And, we're trying to make the world a better place and address climate change by building these facilities. So the state's support is great, and the industry collaboration is great, and conversations like this are amazing. And so I just want to say thank you for having us, and these conversations are really important for all of us to keep pulling forward and make important critical change for our climate.
Rob?
Yeah, thanks, Todd, for having me on. If you talk about the procurement process, I think it's, with the contractors that are bidding these jobs, I think that has a lot to do whether they move forward with the bidding process or not. It truly limits the amount of competitive bidding contractors that you'll get, and so I think the quicker that process is, the more effective it'll be, and it'll get more participation, and we have, like I said, maybe a limited amount of contractors that are willing to take the chances of the uncertainty of the industry and do the work, and it's a gamble for them. I think a lot sometimes. Not only labor, they feel comfortable with us, but with all the uncertainties of the fuel, the materials, the all of it. So it's I think is they become more and more better at the process. I think they'll get more participation in contractors, national contractors, maybe even, and local contractors will shift from the renewable or the gas to the renewable energies, and I think you'll see more of that happen. But I appreciate you having me on. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you, everyone. I think the more conversations we have where regulators, individuals in government, and the private sector are engaged in the conversation and hearing one another is really, really important. So definitely grateful for the Assembly members' participation, for all those in the virtual audience, especially those working in agencies or in the government. Thank you for your work in this. This is a dialogue, and we certainly appreciate you listening and being part of this. And to all the developers who are here today, we obviously are grateful to have you in New York, and hope that you continue to develop here. And of course, to Ace and Ann for battling on behalf of this industry continuously and without fatigue. Thank you for everything and for this time.
Thank you so much, Todd, for facilitating this discussion. It was an excellent discussion. I appreciate your role in that, and our panelists to Rob Akins and Chris, both Chris's, I should say, and Karen, as well as Assemblyman Stern. Really value your time today, and thank you again, Assemblyman Stern, for hosting today's event. I want to thank Anne and the ACE team for helping to organize today's event that I feel went very smoothly. And as I mentioned earlier, we have made a recording of the webinar. We will post that on our YouTube page. We'll let our member organizations and companies know that through our newsletter. But for those who aren't members, please keep an eye on our YouTube page for that, and we'll have it up shortly. But again, just want to